Ring the bell. Hello. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Bashara Addison, and I'm a member of the City Club's debate committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our debate in the Democratic primary contest to select the nominee for U.S. Senate. Before we introduce our candidates and our moderator, here's how the debate will work. The candidates will each have opening statements in an order determined by chance, and then our moderator will put questions to each of the candidates. Our goal in this debate is more of an organic conversation than a strict adherence to timekeeping. Nevertheless, our timekeeper and our moderator will strive to ensure equal time for the candidates. The second half of the program is devoted to questions from you, the audience. In order to ensure questions of the highest quality, we have asked audience members to submit questions by email in advance. So that was the email that you guys received once you registered. Some of those will be asked by those audience members themselves. And in order to preserve some of the spontaneity that the City Club is known for, you all and those of you watching on live stream can submit questions via Twitter. Please tweet them at the City Club, and our team will work them in. We thank you in advance for making them great questions. Now, on to the candidates. Kelli Prather is from Cincinnati. She holds a master's degree in occupational therapy from the University of Findlay and is also a business owner. P.G. Sittenfeld is also from Cincinnati, where he served on the city council since 2011. He's a graduate of Princeton University and holds a master's degree from the University of Oxford. Please welcome our candidates. You'll notice that there is a third candidate in this race, former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland, who has declined our invitation and has actually refused to debate at all in this primary contest. So he, unfortunately, is not on the stage. Now, it is my pleasure to hand off our program to our moderator, William Tarter. Mr. Tarter is a City Club member and a co-founder of the Cleveland Young Professional Senate. Will?
Thank you, Bashara, and welcome everyone to this discussion. And thank you to our candidates for being here on the stage today. We're going to open with 2 minutes of opening statements, and then we'll proceed into the questions. The person who will be directed the primary question will have 90 seconds to speak. Then the other person will have 60 seconds to speak. And depending on that discussion, we might have an additional 30 seconds for each one. You'll see our timer will be Dan, who will give you the yellow card at 15 seconds and the red card at 0 seconds. And don't get 2 red cards. Okay. All right. So with that, Ms. Prather, you will begin.
Thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to thank Dan Malthrop and the members of the City Club of Cleveland for hosting this event. The City Club has a rich history of public and freedom of speech, and so I appreciate you. I'd also like to thank Councilmember Sittenfeld for agreeing to actively engage in this political debate. In terms of Ted Strickland, I believe it's disheartening that he declined an invitation to debate. He showed a sheer lack of respect for democracy and our constituents, the voters. I am an extremely spiritual woman. I love God. As such, I believe that it's important to speak things into existence or speak things as though they are. So I am claiming this seat as a United States Senator. I am an occupational therapist. I'm a minority business owner. I've worked tirelessly behind the scenes in politics for the past 25 years. I'm a social justice and civil rights activist. My platform is centered around healthcare, public safety, education, and economic inclusion. My primary goal as the next United States Senator is to create laws that contribute to equality and justice for all citizens. I pride myself on being present, and so I would not have missed the opportunity to be here. One of the things I also pride myself on is the fact that I have an opportunity to add to the United States Senate, add diversity to the United States Senate. I'll be the first female and the first African-American senator to represent the great state of Ohio, thus giving the country the diversity that's needed to add to the progressive transformation that we're looking for. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it.
After you.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the Cleveland City Club for hosting this debate, and I also want to thank Kelli Prather, both for your commitment to public service and also for caring enough to be here today. There's another candidate who isn't here and who seems to think that he can duck debates and take Democratic primary voters for granted. John Glenn and Howard Metzenbaum didn't believe that, and neither do Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. Ohio Democrats deserve better than Ted Strickland's indifference to our democratic process. And I'm running for the Senate to give them a voice and a choice. But above all, I'm running for the Senate because we can't let Rob Portman make this election just another stale argument about the past. To beat him, we have to make it an exciting conversation about the future. So let me tell you about the kind of future that I seek. I'll fight for a future in which all Ohioans get a fair economic shake, including a livable minimum wage, equal pay for equal work, and no more bad trade deals that send good Ohio jobs to China and to Mexico. It also means a bold new plan to make college affordable so that students and their families aren't crushed under a mountain of student loan debt. I'll fight for a future in which Lake Erie is cleaned up and where climate change is finally taken seriously. And I will fight for a future in which politicians and bureaucrats stop practicing medicine without a license and where women are trusted to make their own healthcare decisions. And to do these things, I will fight for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and stop millionaires and billionaires from hijacking our democracy. And yes, I will fight for a future that isn't stained with the blood of innocent victims of gun violence. Ted Strickland will never stand up to the NRA. I will. On the first day I take office, common sense gun reform will be at the top of my agenda, and I won't stop until we end the rising tide of mass shootings and the slaughter in our streets. That is the future that I seek, and if you share my vision, I ask for your vote on March 15th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of our candidates for your opening statements. So our first question is going to be to you, Ms. Prather. With the passing of Justice Scalia, there is now a national discussion on what the United States Senate should do in the advise and consent capacity with the nominee of President Obama. Some in the Republican leadership in the United States Senate are currently stating that no matter who President Obama picks as his nominee, that he or she will not have the opportunity for a hearing and a confirmation during this presidential term. If elected to the U.S. Senate, would you encourage the president to make a nomination and advocate for he or she to be confirmed to this appointment, or would you argue for a recess appointment? And what qualities would you want to see in a Supreme Court justice?
That's a great question. I would definitely advocate for President Obama to be able to make a nomination to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the Republicans have rejected every initiative that President Obama has placed forth, and that is an insult to the democracy of the United States of America. In terms of the qualities that I would like to see in the next Chief Justice is I would like to see someone who is passionate about civil rights. As a civil rights activist, I believe that we need to have someone who protects the rights of all citizens. There was an initiative where Chief Justice Scalia, where he rejected affirmative action in one of the colleges in Texas. Unfortunately, that hindered democracy. That was an insult to the democratic process. So I hope and pray that we get a Chief Justice who will advocate for civil rights and social justice reform.
Great, thank you. Councilman.
Yeah, I think what Rob Portman is basically saying to Ohio voters right now is that he's not going to do his job. He's not going to fulfill his constitutional duty. And last I checked, Article 2 of our Constitution says that the president shall nominate and the Senate shall advise and consent. It does not say anywhere except in an election year. The President of the United States, Barack Obama, was elected to a 4-year term. Rob Portman seems to somehow think that it was a 3-year term. So he's absolutely mistaken, and I think it speaks to why people all across the state and frankly all across the country are fed up with senators who don't want to do their job, who they seem to want to stop government from actually working. There is plenty of precedent. You know, the last time we're in this situation, Justice Kennedy was nominated by then President Reagan. He was confirmed in a presidential year in 1988 by a 97-0 vote. So it's a fallacy that there's not precedent for doing this. The final thing I would say to the second part of your question, in terms of the qualities that I would look for, I want somebody whose values, broadly speaking, are in line with America's values, who is eminently qualified for the position. And while I don't have a lot of litmus tests, I do have a handful. I do not support a justice who would want to roll back marriage equality. I would not support a justice who believes that money equals speech and who believes that corporations are people. And as I saw a headline in the Cleveland Plain Dealer just recently, titled, I'm paraphrasing, but that said, Ted Strickland waffles on whether or not he would confirm a Supreme Court justice who is anti-abortion rights. That is absolutely a non-negotiable for me as well. I would only support somebody who was going to uphold Roe v. Wade.
Thank you very much. So our next topic of conversation is actually around a recent announcement from Governor Kasich that he signed a law that intends to block Planned Parenthood from receiving services and providing health care in health clinics around the state. The bill, which was sponsored by Democratic Representative Bill Patman of Cleveland and Republican Representative Margaret Condit of Butler County, forbids the state from contracting for health services with any entity that performs or promotes non-therapeutic abortions. What is your reaction to this bill, and what message does it send to women across the state, Councilman?
Yeah, so I'm incredibly troubled, and I think it's shameful what John Kasich, in working in concert with, to me, very extreme state legislature, has just done defunding Planned Parenthood. And there was a headline early in the campaign in the Columbus Dispatch that said, Sittenfeld, I stand with Planned Parenthood. That was true early in the campaign. It was true before this campaign. It's true now. It's going to be true when I get to the United States Senate. In addition to, things like cancer screenings and, treatment for STDs, I do think that women, absolutely should have access to abortion should they want to go that route. And as I said in my opening statement, enough of politicians and bureaucrats trying to tell women what to do with their bodies, what to do with their healthcare choices. So the final thing I would say, just as a matter of common sense, this is an organization that exists to help prevent unintended pregnancies that might lead someone to seek an abortion in the first place. So I think it's misguided policy, but most of all, when I get to the United States Senate and, in this moment as well, I want the women of Ohio to know that they can trust me, and I trust them to be in charge of their own healthcare choices.
Thank you, Councilman.
My response to that question is I was pleased to hear that Governor Kasich strayed from his party's views in terms of expanding Medicaid. It was disheartening to hear that he voted to defund Planned Parenthood. I am a product of the inner city, and I relied on services at Planned Parenthood for contraceptives. I come from a low-income community where we essentially could not afford to go to the doctor, much less the medications. So with the stance that Governor Kasich took, it basically set us back. It showed that he does not value women's reproductive health. He doesn't value women's rights. He does not value a woman's right to choose. And as a woman, I take issue with that. Governor Kasich, I tend to not focus on the party. I am a Democrat, but if you stand for the people, that's what I totally support. And when he expanded Medicaid, I was under the impression that he would also be in support of a woman's reproductive health issues. But defunding Planned Parenthood just essentially set us back, and it's disheartening.
Let's stay on the topic of health care.
Okay.
The Affordable Care Act is one of President Obama's key legislative victories. And some candidates in the presidential race have said that it's celebrated, it has brought coverage to millions of Americans, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court not once but twice. And it only needs to be tweaked moving forward. But others say that it's not enough, arguing that a single payer or a Medicare for all plan would be the best to ensure that no one is left without coverage. What is your opinion of the current state of healthcare in our country, and what ways would you improve it?
As an occupational therapist, I am highly discouraged with the state of healthcare. I am a supporter of the Affordable Care Act. That was one of the biggest and best ideas or initiatives that President Obama set forth. I'm a staunch supporter of the Affordable Care Act because although I was raised in a two-parent household, my parents actually separated because I had health complications where my dad's employee would not cover my health issues. So I was born during the era when they had lifetime maximums, so my parents essentially had to separate so that we could get public assistance for the sake of my health. So I'm actually the sacrificial lamb for my family. And so for that reason, I'm extremely passionate about the Affordable Care Act and ensuring that citizens have health coverage. It keeps families together. Had the Affordable Care Act been around back then, we could have stayed together. In terms of the way that the Affordable Care Act is structured, I believe that it needs work. It's in its infant stages and it needs a lot of work. I do support a single payer funding source where we can know where the funds, if the funds are available, how we can get them, and where to go if there tends to be some type of abuse of the system. So I'm totally in support of that. And
All right.
thank you.
Councilman.
Yeah, I would first just start by saying I think it's important to remind everybody and remind ourselves what some of the impact of the Affordable Care Act has been. You know, millions of people now have coverage that never did before. We have the lowest uninsured rate currently in the history of our country. Women aren't paying more for health care just because they're women. Young people are able to stay on their insurance longer. So while there are improvements that can be made, absolutely this has been a step forward for our country and for the status of our health care. To the second part of your question, in terms of where we need to go, what's true of Obamacare is true of Medicare as well. It's true of the entire healthcare system, and it's that we need to find ways to stop costs from continuing to rise. So amongst the things that I would advocate for and try and fight for as a United States Senator, one, moving away from what's a sort of antiquated fee-for-service model and, trying to replicate and study what's happening at places like the Mayo Clinic and like the Cleveland Clinic, where you're more investing in outcomes and things like that. In the United States, I think this is one of the most immediate places we could start. In the United States, we're paying 3 to 4 times more for drugs than they are in other developed countries, including in nearby Canada. So lifting the prohibition on negotiating with drug manufacturers, I think would allow us to do that too. So I think there are steps that can reduce, and also bringing more transparency into pricing so that consumers have a better idea of why they're paying what for what they're paying for, and creating more efficiencies in the market. So the ACA was good, but there are further steps that can be taken.
Great, thank you. We're going to stay on the domestic front, and according to Yahoo News, Carrier recently announced that they are moving 1,400 jobs from Indianapolis to Monterrey, Mexico. That same article stated that the union has been told that workers in Mexico will make $3 an hour, while workers in Indianapolis will make $20 an hour. And candidates in both presidential primaries have brought the issue to the forefront. Some are saying this is just free market capitalism, and others are saying this is an example of NAFTA taking away good-paying jobs from hardworking Americans. If elected to the U.S. Senate, what would you say to these workers, and what actions would you take to discourage instances like this from happening again, Councilman?
So, just as I said before, I'm absolutely against the continuation of bad trade deals that send good American jobs, including good jobs in places like right here in Ohio, whether it's to Mexico or to China. And, so to be clear, if I was in Congress right now, I'd be voting against TPP. It was interesting to see Rob Portman having a very sudden election year conversion after being an ardent supporter of bad trade deals over the course of his career. When you think about NAFTA, 5 million manufacturing jobs lost, including no shortage right here in Ohio. And TPP, Center for Economic and Policy Research, has said that it would lead to reduced wages for 90% of workers. So I think we've seen this bad movie before. This isn't what we need. If we're going to support trade deals, which can be good for the country and can be good for supporting exports, supporting jobs, I think we need to make sure that we're meeting aspirational standards when it comes to labor practices, aspirational standards when it comes to environmental protections, that we're being serious about currency enforcement and manipulation. So, there is such thing as fair trade, but we certainly haven't seen it in NAFTA, and we're not seeing it in TPP either.
Thank you. Ms. Prather.
I totally support trade deals. In terms of the TPP, I think that it jeopardizes it, already places the American economy in jeopardy. In terms of the car industry, the motor industry in Japan, we're risking possibly giving our jobs there. I have a brother who works for Ford, and his job could essentially be on the line if we continue with trade deals that pull jobs out of our community. In terms of our economy and just the social climate of our economy, Sending our jobs overseas essentially adds to the overall problem of violence. There's a direct connection between senseless acts of violence and the economy. By snatching those jobs out of our community, you're making the situation worse. So, as the next United States Senator, as it relates to trade deals, I will challenge other senators and work collaboratively with senators and say, you know what, we cannot let this happen, because essentially what will happen is we will place the economy in worse shape than it is. Unfortunately, we have politicians who talk the talk. Once they get in there, they know the lingo, they know what people want to hear just to get them elected. However, they waver on their stances when it comes to the PAC committees supporting them, and they know what to say just to get the job, but once they're in there and their super PACs say, you know, this is what's needed, where they change their stance. And I will not be that senator who just goes along to get along and agree to trade deals that compromise the economy, the American economy.
Thank you. Well, my next question is actually about gun violence. And this weekend, a man in Kalamazoo randomly shot and tragically killed 7 people. And in a separate incident this weekend here in Cleveland, there was a gentleman who was shooting at cars on West 117th Street, but he was shot and injured by a security guard who happened to notice what was going on. My question is, if elected to the United States Senate, what steps would you support that would contribute to a reduction in gun violence while still protecting Second Amendment rights? Ms. Prather.
I do. As a civil rights activist, I do totally support protecting the rights of all people, and that includes the Second Amendment rights. However, I will share publicly that I am a gun violence survivor. Unfortunately, the NRA use tactics, say that someone was injured via gun violence. They'll use tactics and say, well, I believe I need a gun because I was injured. I totally disagree. I believe that we should have harsher gun laws to restrict the accessibility of guns on the street. I believe that assault rifles, and I was actually assaulted with an assault rifle, an AK-47. However, I don't feel the need to carry a gun. I think that we need to look at it from a societal standpoint, understand that because guns are more accessible, we have these senseless acts of violence. We have these random acts of terrorism that's ultimately affecting our communities. I've had 4 nephews who were murdered to senseless acts of violence. So again, I'm very passionate about gun control. I believe that the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, she's calling for community-style policing. I believe that the police and the community should work collaboratively to ensure that the communities are safe. And we need to do what's within our control. Now, mind you, criminals will be criminals. Guns will be flood or placed on the streets, however illegal guns get on the street, they will continue to get there. But we need to do whatever is in our control for the sake of the community.
Thank you, Councilman.
So this question and this issue is exactly why we need to have debates, for people to both articulate their vision, but also to take accountability for their record. And if this question was posed to Ted Strickland, what would you do, what have you done about gun violence? The answer would be nothing. Over decades, he has had an A or an A+ rating from the NRA. And when we think about the 30,000 plus lives that are lost because of gun violence in this country every single year, the 11,000 people who die of homicides. I know Cleveland just had its worst year in more than a decade. It's a multifaceted issue, but part of why we are in the situation that we're in is because Congress, the default response has been to do absolutely nothing, to do the bidding of the gun lobby and reject even the most reasonable gun reform. So I want to be crystal clear. When I get to the United States Senate, I will be unabashed in standing up to the NRA, in standing up to the gun lobby, in making sure that we have comprehensive criminal background checks so there aren't loopholes for gun shows and over the internet, to make sure that we reinstate an assault weapons ban, which, by the way, Ronald Reagan himself said that these weapons designed for military combat situations don't belong on the streets of our cities, to make sure that we're holding dealers and manufacturers accountable, no special immunity for the gun lobby, revoking the license of bad actor dealers, and for heaven's sakes, when it comes to just a basic level of common sense, if you're too dangerous to board a plane because you're on our own government's terrorist watch list, you're also too dangerous to walk into a store in Ohio and legally buy an assault weapon or firearm. So this is one of the urgent moral issues of our day. Ted Strickland has been wrong at every step of his career. We need senators that are going to have some courage. And let me also just say to Ms. Prather, thank you for, as a survivor of gun violence. You know, I have great admiration for your courage and perseverance.
Thank you.
Thank
Can
you.
I respond to that? I want to respond to that.
Ms. Prather, please.
Yes. Okay.
30 seconds for both of you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that dramatic stance on gun control. I've worked behind the scenes in politics for the past 25 years. In 2001, when citizens in Cincinnati were being murdered by Cincinnati police officers, I was on the front line fighting for justice for those individuals. Today, a couple weeks ago, I was on the front lines fighting for a citizen who was murdered. I've never seen, Councilmember Sittenfeld is a really nice guy, but I've never seen him in the community on any of these incidents. I have a known track record of working with individuals in the community on the health and not only dealing with the immediate issue, but also the recovery process. So how do you justify that, not being present in the community or even speaking to me about my issue? You know about my issue.
Yeah, so
30 seconds.
I guess what I would say is that's flatly incorrect. I've been on the front lines of an incredibly important range of urban issues in the city of Cincinnati, ranging from gun violence. I've been a huge supporter. In fact, you know, we've recently had Attorney General Loretta Lynch come to Cincinnati and say that what we've done there represents the national model for reforming police-community relations, for reducing crime, for making sure we have strong inner-city public schools. So I guess my response would be I flatly disagree. It's why I've made these issues a centerpiece of my campaign. And I also think why the citizens of Cincinnati, both Democrats and Republicans, black and white, east side and west side, made me the highest vote getter in the city of Cincinnati, including winning by the highest margin in the city of Cincinnati. I think they did that because of my record of accomplishment, including on these issues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And actually, we have time for 2 more questions. This has gone by very quickly. So my next question to Councilman Sittenfeld. Yesterday was the 51st anniversary of the passing of Malcolm X. And then just today, there was a letter that I came across that was written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On February 22nd, 1968. And reading in this letter, he talked about how it's so necessary for support in this particular case in his letter. And he talks about how the support that he got from this particular individual gives him renewed courage and vigor to carry on in the struggle for racial justice. So looking back during that era and where we are today, what would civil rights leaders during that era think of the community relations today?
I think they would say that we have a whole lot of work yet to do. And you know, I've been very blunt in this campaign that we need to, and you know, this is obviously incredibly real and relevant issue for a community like Cleveland. We need to be blunt and have the courage to say that institutional racism in our society is a real thing, and it's reflected in inequities in our justice system. It's reflected in disparities in healthcare, where the zip code that you're born into can determine what your life expectancy is going to be. So, you know, I was honored as I've been talking about these issues, as I've been fighting for these issues as a member of City Council for the last 5 years in the city of Cincinnati, and also as a United States Senate candidate, that one of the most influential pastors in Toledo, Pastor Donald Perryman, invited me at a Black Lives Matter service to give the keynote address, where I talked about things like ending mandatory minimum sentencing and making sure that unemployment amongst African American youth isn't 3 times the national average. So, you know, I obviously have incredible gratitude for, you know, the pioneers who have fought this fight before us to bring us to the point where we are. But without question, there's so much work that needs to be done.
Thank you, Councilman. Ms. Prather.
As I stated in my introductory statement, I am a social justice and civil rights activist, and I believe the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, I believe that they will be appalled at the state of our condition, at the state of our nation, not only Ohio, but the state of our nation. Again, my platform is centered around healthcare, public safety, education, and economic inclusion. My primary goal as your next United States Senator is to improve racial and socioeconomic equity so that we don't have the civil rights issues that plague our system. Councilmember Sittenfeld did indicate that we are plagued by a system of institutionalized racism and institutionalized discrimination, and we need to work really, really hard to challenge that. We need faces that reflect the people in the government. In Councilmember Sittenfeld's interview, Keeping It PG, with the University of Cincinnati, he indicated that the government needs to reflect diversity. We need more women. We need more minorities in positions of power. he essentially said that I am what the government needs. I am the voice of civil rights, and I'm ready to just make a difference. I'm ready to make that difference because I am a powerful force. I've not only lived through every system, either myself, someone in my family, one of my friends have been subjected to the institutionalized racism, and I'm ready to be the voice of the hopeless, the voice for the powerless, to make a difference, to share my experiences, good, bad, or ugly, to just make a difference and to instill hope in our communities.
Thank you.
Well, if I can respond to one thing.
30 seconds for each.
I do think I'm the right person in the right moment with the right set of ideas and a bold new progressive platform for this United States Senate seat. But 'cause I absolutely think that your voice and your ideas are needed in government. I think I'm the right person for this seat at this moment, but I absolutely think that we need more Kelli Prathers. The one other thing I would say in terms of dealing with issues of institutional racism and inner city poverty and mass incarceration and healthcare disparities is, it's always going to be a collaborative team effort. So I've taken very seriously on the course of being on the campaign trail here, sitting down and before he passed away, hearing from and benefiting from the wisdom of someone like Congressman Stokes, of going to worship at Mount Olivet and talk to Pastor Colvin, of sitting down and benefiting from the thoughts and wisdom of someone who worked very closely with Dr. King in Reverend Otis Moss. So, I will always also try and be a bridge builder and reach out and form those partnerships so that we can together make progress on these issues.
Thank you. Ms. Prather, your response.
I totally disagree. I believe that I am the very best candidate for the position at this time. I'm a member of New Prospect Baptist Church. My pastor is my social justice mentor. His father, Damon Lynch Jr., was a civil rights activist, and he is also a mentor. I represent what's needed in the United States Senate at this time to bring progressive transformation. All due respect, Council Member Sittenfeld has worked very hard. However, he is a jumper. This is an opportunity for him. We don't need a rock star senator. We need someone who has been in the trenches and understand life from the everyday person's experience. I represent that person.
We have one more question before we transition over to Q&A. And this one is surrounding a topic that is on a lot of people's minds, especially in the presidential race, and that's the topic of national security.
Okay.
Recently, according to NBC News, the United States and Russia announced a preliminary cessation of hostilities in Syria to deliver humanitarian relief in the war-torn country of Syria. But shortly thereafter, a series of ISIS-backed bombs exploded in Syria, killing 130 people. Some people think that ISIS must be defeated with more troops on the ground, and other people think the democratic approach is the best way to go. If elected to the U.S. Senate, how will you approach difficult foreign policy issues like this one, especially in a place as volatile as the Middle East? Ms. Prather first.
I believe that we need to be careful in stereotyping or being discriminatory.
Okay.
That's a woman issue.
Okay.
I believe that we need to be careful and not being discriminatory. America is known as the land of the opportunity. We need to look at it from a spiritual perspective and understand if we were in that situation, how would we want people to treat us? So the word says treat people the way that you want to be treated, and I am a huge advocate for that. In terms of allowing the Syrian refugees into our country, I totally support that. If we have an opportunity to bring Syrian refugees or refugees from other countries to the United States of America to create a better life for them, I support that. In terms of feeling threatened that they're going to come here, they're going to take our jobs, the immigrants who I know, they're not employee-minded, they're employer-minded. So what essentially happens is they come here, they start their businesses, they employ their own. Likewise, what I would do is I would work with those citizens and say, tell us how you do it. What makes your country, I understand with the understanding that there are bad things in every country. What are the good things, or what is your education system like that instills you to not have that slave mentality, the employee mentality, and want to come over and start businesses for yourself? So I think there will be a really good way to bridge international relationships and to just be the open and welcoming community that the United States of America is known for being. So
thank you.
That's my take.
Thank you. Councilman?
So following what happened in Paris, what happened in San Bernardino, there's no question that everyone feels nervous and more fearful about the threat of terrorism, about the threat of ISIS, and they absolutely are a real threat to the United States. But I think we also have to be mindful that they are a more immediate threat to some of our allies in the region. So Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. And there is nothing that ISIS would like to do more than actually goad America into sending troops back into the region. And I think that if that's going to happen, we need to, through every diplomatic channel possible, lean on our allies in the region to say, we're going to express our own commitment to doing this. So, making sure that they're, if there are going to be American troops there, I think that some of our allies end up needing to go first. I think there also needs to be some measure of humility that so much of what's happening there right now is a function of a Sunni-Shia divide that's 1,000 years older than the United States is. So the notion that we can sort of go in and in a tidy, crisp way solve a lot of the turmoil and the tension in the Middle East, I'm not sure that's entirely realistic. And I think previous cowboy diplomacy and terrible decisions like the initial decision to invade Iraq, they're a lot of what have created this situation in the first place. So absolutely take the threat of ISIS very seriously, continue with targeted airstrikes, but make sure that our American brothers and sisters and sons and daughters are not the ones going in there first.
Thank you. So this time we're going to transition to audience Q&A, and we have a gentleman from the City Club who is holding onto the mic. So our first question, please.
My name is Reverend Chris Eggert, and I'm here to ask a question about gun violence. We are so gratified that gun violence has now taken the national political stage and is being talked about, on this particular debate stage today. You've both taken a stand about gun violence. I'd like for you now to take a moment to talk about the differences between each other in your gun violence stance, but also your differences between the candidate who is not here to talk about his own stance on gun violence. Thank you.
Councilman first.
Yeah, it sounds like there's pretty broad alignment in terms of where we would be on policy issues. Again, I support universal background checks. I don't think that assault weapons belong on the streets of our cities. I think steps need to be taken to hold manufacturers and bad actor dealers more accountable. We've even talked about more innovative things like micro-stamping ammunition so that you can more easily trace a bullet back, law enforcement can more easily trace a bullet back to the gun from which it came. I would say all of this, I'm proud that we've run a very substantive campaign. All of this is on my website, pgsittenfeld.com, if anybody wants to see more of those policies. So I'm not sure that there would be on the issues a lot of disagreement. Again, I think when Ted Strickland earlier in this campaign, as a declared United States Senate candidate in this current cycle, boasted about having an A+ rating from the NRA, bragged about being the guy who voted against the assault weapons ban, and then said, that was my position and it is my position. That's where Ted Strickland is on that issue. I mean, look, he's also said, judge me by my record. His record is voting against every common sense gun safety regulation that's been put forward both in the time that he was in Congress and also the time he was in the governor's office. So look, I think we need someone that's going to be bold and brave and push back against the NRA and push back against the extreme wing of the gun lobby. I think I've shown at the city level in Cincinnati that I'm willing to do that. I've certainly shown in this United States Senate campaign that I'm happy and willing to do that. And when you have the President of the United States himself saying that he is a single issue voter on this, clearly, and for the better, I think the American electorate has changed where they are. They're saying enough is enough. We need a senator that's going to match that.
Thank you, Councilman. Ms. Prather.
My response is that Councilmember Sittenfeld was correct in saying that we are in total alignment in terms of the policy or how to approach this issue. However, I will go on record and say that Councilmember Sittenfeld knows the lingo. He's speaking the language the politicians want to hear to get their support. I'm a community member who has been subjected to gun violence personally and impacted by it by losing family members. I'm a minority business owner, and unfortunately in our community, a lot of times we don't have life insurance. Being that I was one of the only people in my family who had money to bury loved ones, I've had to spend money out of my pocket to bury my nieces and nephews. So in terms of making policies, when I make policies and procedures, I'm going to do that with loved ones in mind. I'm constantly in the community working with mothers who of a group called Who Murdered My Son. So in terms of accountability, I believe that a lot of times we talk about what the police, what they're doing to us or what the system is doing to us, but I also think that there needs to be a level of accountability for those individuals in the community who act out. I think that everyone should be held accountable. In terms of incidents, gun violence, where we've had citizens like Tamir Rice or children like Tamir Rice who was subjected to gun violence. I believe that prosecutors should be held accountable. I believe that the mayor who was the chief officer of police departments, they need to be held accountable. So there needs to be accountability across the board, and we need to apply a more collaborative approach to ensure that our communities are safer.
Thank you.
May I add one comment?
30 seconds. And
I just say that while I wish we had a United States Senate that was ready at this very moment to take action in terms of bringing forward common sense gun safety legislation, we need a few more senators to get to that threshold. So I'm not waiting to take action. One of the things that we've initiated and been involved in the course of this campaign is a citizen-led constitutional amendment process that will restore home rule to cities like Cleveland and all across Ohio to make the changes that they want. So cities like Cleveland and Columbus used to have assault weapons ban. If our constitutional amendment passes, you would have that right to go forward and things like that. So I'm ready for action at the local level in addition to the United States Senate.
Ms. Prather.
Yes, I'll respond to that. And I appreciate that comment. However, we need politicians who are going to be actively in the community. Again, I've never seen Councilmember Sittenfeld at one of the rallies. I'm an active member of the Cincinnati Black United Front as well as Black Lives Matter movement locally. And I've never seen Councilmember Sittenfeld out there on the battlefield fighting for justice. Essentially, even though I've been in harm's way in terms of gun violence, I continue to put my life on the line because I care about my community. And I think that we need more politicians who not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, be visible, be present, have an open door policy. I've even reached out to City Hall about specific issues, and Councilmember Sittenfeld did not open his door for me and my issue.
We're going to have to move on.
Since
My
my name was invoked, I'm going to give a quick reply. Just because you say it doesn't make it so. I have been omnipresent in my hometown, in the Cincinnati community, working hard, fighting for these issues, everything from attending rallies to one issue we haven't even gotten into, inner city urban education, trying to help promote a model that I actually spoke about on the City Club debate stage before to make sure that every young person, when they walk into a school in Cincinnati, is going to have opportunity. It's been adopted in cities like New York and Philadelphia. So I'm very proud of my community record. I think it's reflected in being the top vote getter in the city of Cincinnati.
That's 30 seconds, and 30 seconds to you, Ms. Prather, in response if you'd like.
Okay, yes, I would like to respond
And
to that.
that's it. We got to move to the next question. Go ahead.
In terms of the initiative that Councilmember Sittenfeld is speaking of, it's an initiative that was established a decade ago, and he pretty much just piggybacked on that. Councilmember Sittenfeld is a really nice guy, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but he is not ready to be a legislator because he does not understand life from the public sector. He attended private school. I am a product of the Cincinnati Public School, and I know that there's issues in the schools, and I have over 100 nieces and nephews in the school systems, and I know what's available, and nothing like that is available.
Okay, we're going to have to end that question.
Okay.
We're going on to the next one.
Thank you both so much for being with us here in Cleveland this afternoon. The divisiveness in Washington and difficulty the parties have working together and reaching compromise is increasingly limiting the ability of the federal government to lead and govern. If elected, what specific actions would you take to work with your Republican counterparts in the Senate to advance and improve legislation? Thank you.
I think we're at Ms. Prather first.
I will say that I pride myself on not focusing on the party, but focusing on the person. As I've indicated, I've worked behind the scenes in politics for the past 25 years. Right out of high school, I worked on Republican Governor George Vornovich's campaign, fighting for justice, fighting to get him in office. Currently, I work collaboratively with City Council member Charlie Winburn, who is very instrumental in bringing jobs to our community. So I definitely want to work collaboratively with members of both parties to ensure that the needs of the community are met, that we're focusing on the highest and best interests of the community as opposed to focusing primarily on my party and furthering my agenda. I don't have an agenda. Essentially, my platform is the people's platform. As a social justice and civil rights activist, I want to ensure that the rights are protected and that there's fairness and equality across the board. I mentioned the fact that I want to increase greater racial and socioeconomic equity, and I mean that. As a minority business owner, I would love to see more minority businesses throughout the state. I believe that every industry in the country is monopolized by big business, and I tend to dismantle the big business monopoly and empower other minority businesses to work together, and that means having people work together, not parties divided. So that's my response.
Councilman.
I think there's no question that the level of divisiveness and rancor is out of control. And well, as you already know, there are a number of issues on which I will not equivocate or bend, a woman's right to choose, making sure that we, don't continue to allow for unlimited big money in politics, making sure that we're being. So I think what I would say, though, is despite while there are a number of issues on which, there isn't room for compromise, compromise is not a dirty word, right? This is part of what allows our democratic system, our government, to actually work. And I think right now, you see people like Ted Cruz who think that shutting down the federal government is somehow some sort of badge of honor. So I would say, look, let's find those areas of common ground, and I think they do exist. I mean, ranging from tax reform to dealing with the crisis of addiction in our society right now, to criminal justice reform. I think there are a lot of places where the lens doesn't need to be Democrat or Republican. So, as I've done for the last 5 years at City Hall, I've worked with Democrats, Republicans, independents to get things done on issues ranging from education to foreclosure stabilization to bring technology into government. So I'll bring a spirit of let's work together to solve problems. I think that's what people expect from their government.
Next question, please.
Yes, Ms. Prather touched upon this, but what specifically would you like to see happen regarding immigration reform?
Councilman, you're first.
Yeah, so I think we've seen a bill that, interestingly, was co-sponsored by Senator Rubio, who subsequently decided to retreat from it. But very few things that are as controversial as immigration end up getting 67 votes in the United States Senate. But that comprehensive immigration bill was one of them. So I support a system where, yes, we're taking the security of our borders seriously and taking necessary steps to increase border agents, but where we're also allowing a pathway to citizenship and saying, you know what, if you're willing to go to the back of the line and pay a fine and make sure you keep a clean criminal record, that's what the United States is all about. I mean, continue to be a beacon of hope and welcoming folks from all over the world into our country. Two other just things on this issue. I was very disappointed that Ted Strickland joined a lot of other sort of more extreme voices in calling for a temporary halt on allowing Syrian refugees into the country. If you are a terrorist trying to get into the United States, you're not trying to do it with refugee status. However, what we do need to do is make sure that we're fixing our visa waiver program, where folks from more than 30 countries can currently get into the United States for a period of 90 days with very little vetting. So absolutely support comprehensive immigration reform. Would have voted for the bill that passed through the Senate and unfortunately was never brought up in the House.
Ms. Prather.
Yes, I totally support immigration reform. My campaign manager, I was able to meet one of her friends who is actually from another country. Her parents are immigrants, and she was born in another country, and she came here. She went through school and graduated from the public school system here locally. However, because her parents were immigrants and because she was born in another country, she still battles with citizenship issues. So I support immigration reform. Immigration reform essentially helps the country because it helps in terms of security, because it helps us to understand who's in the country, where they are, how we can locate them to keep us safe. So it holds people accountable. It also gives us the opportunity to encourage them to be tax-paying citizens and help our economy, essentially. So I'm in total support of immigration reform. I think that it also will help streamline the citizenship process and just create for a friendly environment where the United States will continue to be the land of opportunity that it was originally designed to be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We now have a question from Twitter.
Yes, this is actually going to be our last question from the audience. And the question from Twitter says, how is your U.S. Senate campaign attracting new interest / voters to the Democratic Party and the electoral process in general? So this is the last question before your closing remarks.
Great, thank you. I think this is to Ms. Prather.
That was a wonderful question. I'm excited to say that I entered the race late. My campaign is grassroots, totally grassroots. I financed my campaign on a $4,500 budget that I pretty much paid for myself. Unlike my opponent, Mr. Sittenfeld, who has a super PAC behind him, and from what I understand, he has close to $1 million. We are head and head, neck and neck in the race. So that speaks to the fact that the citizens of the United States want change. They want a new, fresh face. They want diversity. They want a woman in office who represents them, who understands life from the everyday person's experience. I'm happy to hear that Councilmember Sittenfeld respects the Black Lives Matter movement, but you will never understand the African American experience unless you've lived through it. I did have an opportunity to move to New York. I lived in New York for 9 years, where I owned and operated my own business. I came back to Ohio with the thought of creating the same opportunities, not only for myself, but for my community. And unfortunately, Ohio is plagued by institutionalized racism that limits minority and low-income and African-American businesses from thriving the way major corporations are. I come from a family of humble beginnings. Unlike my counterpart, who comes from a family, or his father, from what I understand, is an investment banker. I don't have those opportunities, and that's the difference. But the fact that we're head and head speaks volumes, and I'm excited. I'm excited about this campaign, so thank you for that question.
I think if this election cycle has shown us anything, it's had some unpredictable outcomes thus far. And I think it's clear that there is an appetite and a hunger from the electorate for something new and fresh and not more of the same. And the reality is that between them, Ted Strickland and Rob Portman have spent nearly 4 decades in Washington. I think there is an appetite for people that are bringing new voices and fresh perspectives, and also a bold, progressive new agenda. So I think part of how we've been able to get people excited in this campaign, including young people, but certainly not exclusively young people, is by leaning in on the epidemic and offering solutions to the epidemic of gun violence, taking climate change as seriously as we have, making sure that we're building an economy that works for everybody. The very first proposal of our campaign was around bringing down the crushing burden of student loan debt. So I think people want new voices, but I also think they want people who aren't going to be afraid to be progressive in their agenda. I think that's what's going to bring more people into the fold.
All right, we are going to move now to closing statements.
Okay.
Ms. Prather, since you began, we begin our closing statements.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending today's debate. The fact that you took the time to come out and to share, to listen to our platforms, show that you also share that same passion for democracy. In closing, I'd like to say again, Councilmember Sittenfeld is a really nice young man. However, he lacks the life experience, the personal and the professional experience that's needed to create the progressive transformation that's needed in society. I am 43 years old, and I'm proud to say, considering the fact that I've had a traumatic incident, I'm proud to say that I've lived. God saved me for a purpose. This run for the United States Senate is not about me. It's not about a position, it's not about a paycheck, and it's not about a title. I've worked proudly behind the scenes because I enjoy being behind the scenes. I'm not a showboat. I don't like being up front, but in the current social climate, we need a United States Senator who's going to take a firm stance on the issue. There are issues within city in Cincinnati, such as the streetcar, where Councilmember Sittenfeld promised the voters that he would not support the streetcar. However, he wavered totally on that, and he is in total support of that. And as a result, taxpayers have to pay $133 million for a car that's essentially inoperable at this point. I believe we have 3 cars, and it will not be fully functional until September of next year. So when you look at that, that speaks to his character. I am the very best candidate for this position in the current social climate. I'm a social justice activist. I'm a civil rights activist. I collaborate with individuals in the community who want the change that's necessary. Sojourner Truth said that truth prevails. In this case, the truth will prevail. If you look at City Council members Sittenfeld's track record, it confirms that he is wavering and he is a jumper. He's jumping from City Council to the United States Senate, and I guarantee you, within the next 4 to 8 years, he'll be running for president. Kelli Prather will be confident and satisfied as a legislator, creating laws that contribute to equality and justice for all people. This race is not about me. This is about you. This is about me getting the change that we need in society to better society and to improve the quality of life for all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman.
I again want to thank the City Club for hosting this debate, where today you've heard from 2 of the 3 Democrats who will be on the Senate primary ballot. That Ted Strickland refused to join us today is an insult, not to me or to Kelli Prather, but to this club, the city of Cleveland, and rank-and-file Democrats all across the state. Apparently, Mr. Strickland thinks that debates are beneath him. He does not believe that he should have to stand on this or any other stage and let the voters compare him side by side with his opponents. Mr. Strickland seems to think that he is entitled to this nomination and should not be asked to earn it. But with that kind of imperial attitude is exactly why voters are so fed up with career politicians. Ted Strickland and Rob Portman have spent a combined nearly 40 years in Washington. They've had their chance. To fix the mess in Washington, what we need now are fresh faces and new voices and bold, progressive ideas. It's time to turn the page. It's time to pass the torch to a new generation of leaders. As a city councilman, I'm part of a local government that's working and getting things done. I'm proud to have been reelected by the largest margin of victory in Cincinnati history. But I'm even prouder of the thousands of new jobs that we've brought to our city, the innovative education ideas that have been copied in cities like Philadelphia and New York, and the dramatic improvement in our police-community relations that Attorney General Loretta Lynch herself said represents a national model. And now I want to bring that same can-do spirit to Washington and to the U.S. Senate. So if you are tired of politics as usual, if you think it's time for change, then I ask for your vote. I will work hard, I will do what I say, and I will not let you down. Thank you all very much.
Okay, we'll have a round of applause for both of our candidates. Bashar?
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a debate between two of the three candidates for Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate, Kelli Prather and P.G. Sittenfeld. Our moderator was today at the City Club was City Club member Will Tarter. Thank you, Ms. Prather and Mr. Sittenfeld, for joining us today, and thank you, Mr. Tarter, for participating and coming up with some wonderful questions. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon. Our forum is now adjourned.
Congratulations.
Hi. Thank you.